discuss about a question that is central to the project of Finland here in Documenta and in general. That is the position of the view, the gaze of the cultural worker par excellence that approaches the otherness, that is the anthropologist, but also beyond the anthropologist as such, as a field, as an expert, the artist, no, as well as an anthropologist, and the way in which we can find forms to connect, to understand, and to intervene. No? Today we were working on different working groups with the aspects of culture, language, and this is very much related with today's topic. And this roundtable, it's also one of the forms in which the very fruitful collaboration with Sofía Mariscal and Fundación Marzo takes form. For the last years, we have been working together invited by Fundación Marzo to engage with Tierra Norte, a project that she will tell us more about. Sofía Mariscal is the person that has been also shaping and giving form to part of the exhibition. As you might have visited it, as you might have seen, it's organized by learning units or spaces for learning, and in particular, we had the chance to give shape, no? Again, to a thesis we have been working with for the last years as well, that it's related with the project of Tierra Norte. Well, Sofía started Fundación Marzo in 2011 after studying as well anthropology and history of art, and the work that has been carried also involves from curatorial, very serious curatorial activity, also in the form of gallery beforehand, but very much as well with research-based curatorial work. In part as well of accompanying processes like Venus Biennale, Mexican Pavilion, and other moments in which the work has been visible. But in this case, the continuous commitment to the context of Chihuahua, where you actually come from, is giving shape to this beautiful project. That it's, that I would say is more interesting is that what we see today is the discussion about concepts of the project, but the project is really happening in the ground. It's now this a month ago you were there in the field, starting to plan the first, let's say the grounding stones for the community center for the Association of Women Sheep Herders from San Ignacio Areco, and it's part of the ongoing work and ongoing engagement with the revitalization of the crafts, the wool crafts, but other crafts as well. And actually the empowerment of the indigenous communities through that. So thanks a lot for organizing, helping so much in all the projects. Thank you as well to all our other guests in this roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining this afternoon. It's a real pleasure. We're super grateful for being given this space to share with you some of the questions informing our current projects and our ongoing collaborations with England and other agents. I'm going to introduce you a little bit more how this table came to be. So the title of the table is Dismantled Museum, and it is intended to be a series of conversations proposed by England, going beyond this edition of Documenta, regarding the way in which representation, intervention, and knowledge production have been skewed from the institutional perspectives on the one hand, and the way in which community and independent initiatives have responded to it, creating liminal spaces, dialogues, and tensions in which many alternative practices have settled. These first two panels will explore the tensions created by encounters between art and anthropology, and how these intersections have been opened a way to critical views about alterity and center-periphery notions, and foster new questions about the ethnographic practices in both disciplines. So today's panel, it's in a way part of a two-folded conversation that will continue in tomorrow's dialogue. Today, we'll focus more on the research and production processes, while tomorrow we'll discuss more specifically the issues of patrimony preservation and interpretation, collections, institutional versus community-powered projects. And also, I'd like to punctualize that the subtitle for this roundtable, Decentering the Anthropologist, was not intended at all to point fingers only toward the anthropological discipline. It was more of a provocation, since we'll be addressing topics that typically have been subjects of this discipline, such as alterity, cultural patrimony, and representation. But we'd like very much to address the reflexivity process in the current art production and curatorial practices that have taken such topics as source of exploration. And in that sense, we'd like to bring to the table the many uses and abuses by contemporary art practitioners in the form of appropriation, biased information on the ways in which collaboration actually takes place. This is in the production of art pieces or exhibitions, as well as the omission of proper credits or acknowledgement of co-authorship. But moreover, we'd like to stand at a critical perspective of ways of inclusion, the so-called indigenous artists in the mainstream circuit, acknowledging that many of these attempts have not only failed, but have reproduced, consolidate, or even exacerbate forms of exclusion and marginalization. The conversation will naturally focus on different cases of Latin America, as we have the luck to have in this table Giuliana Borea, Pamela Cevallos, who joined us online, Sabina Aguilera, and of course Cuauhtémoc, Medina, all of whom have made important contributions in both disciplines and its crossing paths. We'll also revise the tensions in this region that's very questionable as a unified cultural region, but certainly sharing common problematics among the governmental and official institutions advancing cultural unicity policies, and the many Aboriginal nations seeking for voice and recognition for their human, citizen, and land rights. Attention that, on the other hand, have triggered a response by academics, anthropologists, and art practitioners, marked by a shift from universal epistemological aspirations to more local and specific aspects of the issues that inform projects in both fields. This is, of course, not new, but it's certainly getting stronger, I must say. But since many years ago, academics and intellectuals from these countries have theorized about the more effective ways of participation of the so-called other. And this manner of analysis would point also to an alternative genealogy for these disciplines in our countries, a topic that we'll be analyzing also in this afternoon's table. Okay, so finally, I would love to share with you briefly Tierra Norte and how we started this project and what it's about. I'm so sorry to be the very first to take the word, but it's just the way we figured we could have a more dynamic conversation. So Tierra Norte, it's a very personal, it started from a very personal preoccupation. I'm from Chihuahua, and I recently discovered that my father's grandmother was a Raramuri woman. And so I was very curious and preoccupied of the absence of the cultural and artistic expressions from northern Mexico, and especially those of the indigenous communities in the central dialogues in the country. So with a profound ignorance and just didn't know how to approach an indigenous community. I'd never been part of a more deep projects regarding these other cultural way of living. So I approached friends, artists, curators, academics who shared similar preoccupations, among which I found the deep studies on Raramuri textiles by Sabina Aguilera here, who quickly became my friend and mentor, and Fernando whose experience reaching contemporary art practices with agroecological and rurality shed a lot of light on what I wanted to do. I also found Adolfo Fierro, a very young Raramuri designer, who introduced me to his friends and family and shared with me a set of preoccupations in the Raramuri cultural decay, the loss of language, traditions, etc., and the lack of attention and space for representation from organizations and art institutions. So with this allies, we started a very open-ended, interdisciplinary and intuitive academic and field research, from which we started dialogues with the Raramuri men and women, local institutions, and other agents working hand in hand with them. In this first exercise, it took the form of an online archive and collected field notebook that we wish to keep on feeding and that we call Casa Caminante de Saberes Raramuri, or Raramuri Knowledge Walking Hub. And that can be consulted. Well, that's the region of the Raramuri territory. Yeah, we can go ahead. And this is pretty much the archive or the very first notes that we from which we started to put together. We take context, and then from there we started to see what can be done. So from this first exercise, we started another project that's called De la Oveja a la Cobija, or from the ship to the quilt or blanket, that looked for the revitalization of the Raramuri wool textiles, especially the big blankets. Many members of this community shared with us a preoccupation for this endangered technique and the consequent loss of communal knowledge and rituals that they certainly seek to transmit to coming generations. I consulted Sabina on her findings through her work with Raramuri weavers into the villages. And well, at that moment, when we started, there were only about 6 weavers working in the region. Many of them already of advanced age, and really the younger individuals weren't particularly interested, except for my friend Adolfo. His mother is a weaver, and together they have been exploring with new models and formats. But from them, I learned that one of these pieces can take about 6 months to be done, and that every piece is very personal. Sabina here will elaborate much more about the symbolic importance of these textiles, its iconography, and about the act of weaving as a space of individual reflection and expression. I'd only like to point out that in this understanding, we advocate for the idea of these items, these practices, as art with capital letters, in which the individual and the collective are interweaved as many other aspects of the Raramuri way of living. So we want to take these items out of the circuits of craftsmanship and popular, the category of popular art, and try to explore much more or in deep what were they about, you know? In this process, we've also learned from our Raramuri colleagues about their belief on the unity of all elements in a constant, continuous mind that connects us human with all the non-human forms of life. And in that understanding, we follow their lead to see this act of intervention / collaboration as a whole, in which each aspect plays a fundamental role. That's why this project goes from the enhancement of the shepherd techniques and hers, where we taking information and orientation from inland, and to the collaborative design and final promotion strategies. So we want to be circular, we want to be a project that's integrated and very, very conscious of that. When you intervene one thing, you might be also affecting other things of the whole. So through many trips to the Raramuri territories and conversations with many women there, an association of 25 women weavers and shepherds was created. This was only possible with Sedain's help, a local organization that have been working in the region for more than 30 years, and it's our main ally and collaborator. The Weavers Association recently took the form of a cooperative in which we share responsibilities, ideas, expenses, and income. And Marso's main task among the cooperative is to promote their projects with exhibitions and different platforms for commercialization of the pieces and help them to sustain their practice. And needless to say that the ultimate direction of the project is theirs, and it is organized through an internal system of governance to which we, of course, are to equally subject. So through these long-term commitment and slow-paced projects, Our ultimate objective is to detonate transcultural and interdisciplinary process of knowledge composition in which everyone involved can become very aware of their own subjectivity and learn to actively listen. By the way, there is Tito Rivas' sound pieces in the exhibition. It's a collaboration we did with him. It's a sound artist and researcher that put this assemblage of the Raramuri sounds. The piece is called Kipu, and it means to listen in Raramuri. So that's really something that's been directing or practice and or dialogues with the Raramuri people. Just really quickly share with you how this project has led us to establish other kind of dialogues with other Raramuri creators who had been asking for help or or collaboration for different things. One of those was the construction of a community center nearby to an oven. I don't know if the oven, yeah, that's the oven. It was an oven constructed by the government, but it's very sophisticated and well done. But it was just isolated in the middle of the village, and they can use it just very limitedly due to the lack of a workshop or a workspace nearby. So together we started to search for solutions, and that's how we started a collaboration with Juan Casillas and his students from the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico. And it's been fascinating to start this collaborative project in the architectural field. They built, can you go back? Thank you. They built these models that works like Legos, and that's why they start to create a dialogue on like what they need, what they want, how they want to be the centers to be. Because one of the things we really encourage and think that can guarantee the sustainability of these projects is that they are super owned by the community. It's designed by them, by their own needs. Otherwise, it just becomes a white elephant. So it's been a really, really interesting way of collaborating, and it's been also a fruitful knowledge exchange in construction techniques, for example. The students have been learning from the vernacular construction systems, and the community is also learning about new techniques of bioconstruction with straw bales and dirt. That's very easily replicable for other constructions within the community. And we're presenting a model of this technique within Inland's exhibition. You can see this, the construction methodology. That's very interesting. Just finally and super quickly, I'd like to share with you a project that's very much in the ink well yet. And it's a collective curatorial exercise revolving around the 19th century ethnographic expeditions in the Raramuri region by the ethnographer, Norwegian ethnographer Carmen Foltz. And the collection he put together for the Museum of Natural History in New York, which represent the very first records, ethnographic studies, collections of objects, photographic and sound archives for the Raramuri culture. His contributions to a myriad of areas continue to be of great reference of knowledge in this region. However, it's super unknown by the Raramuri themselves. So starting from a historiographic review of these ethnographic accounts, some of the Foltz expeditions will be remade in an exercise of virtual repatriation of these collections in the form of pictures, videos, sound, text that we're going to share with them, and we're going to submit to their own analyses. Crossing temporalities. And what we like to do is to foster a dialogue of the implications of these collections as a form of material preservation on the one hand and cultural extractivism on the other hand, to further explore the ways in which they preserve their cultural knowledge and perceive their own history, and how, if so, they would like to share this with people outside their nation. So we invited agents from different fields, from artists to scientists, to be part of this dialogue. And the idea is to put together a series of exhibitions that can attend this complexity. The exhibitions will take place in the same community, directed to the local public through a mobile and modular structure that will be taking different forms. It's inspired in these sort of structures there. These are the roads that we're going to be doing. And the idea is the results of these exhibitions and explorations in many of the communities will form a meta structure that will parasite a bigger institution in the city of Chihuahua and later on in Mexico City. Ideally, the National Museum of Anthropology to emphasize the symbolism of the action. And so we're there. That's a long-term project. And now I would love to share the work with Sabina, and you'll tell us more.
Thank you very much. I want to also thank Fernando and Sofía for the invitation. It's very nice to be here. Yeah, I'm going to share with you my experience working with Raramu weavers in northern Mexico. I've been focusing on textiles for some years now. It's just the same as Sofía's, just to show where northern Mexico, Chihuahua is. During my first year of ethnology studies, I had an unexpected but magnificent opportunity to work with important ethnographic collections in two museums. The National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. and the American Museum of Natural History in New York, where they have amazing, I don't know what to call it, objects, things, a big number of Raramu textiles within all these objects, and probably the most important ones are those collected by Karl Longholtz that Sofía already mentioned. And this is how my path in the textile realm began. I was working in a project where the main intention was to talk about how through the textiles one could understand about migration routes, knowledge sharing, aesthetical preferences, storytelling, worldview, knowledge, more or less these themes between northern Mexico and the southwest of the USA. So after 6 months of working with the collections, I found it fascinating, but also awkward because it was strange to be in this deposits full of impressive amount of stuff, not only of northern Mexico, but of peoples all over the world. So I really had a lot of questions and curiosity to be in the communities with the people, flesh and blood, and see how these textiles were being made. And actually, this feeling is still going on. It hasn't finished. I'm still learning, and it's like an ongoing process. But my experience or my story began by bringing photographs of the collected textiles I had been working with in the museums to a small ranch in the Gorges. And the families who saw these images were very interested, very engaged in conversations among them about the designs, because they could recognize them, but they weren't reading them anymore. So it was something very interesting to see. Bringing these photographs from old textiles brought memories and motivation to reread what they weren't reading anymore. So the head of the family, who kindly allowed me to stay with them in my visits, Valentin Catarino, is still a very well known weaver from this ranch. And he was very interested to start weaving the sashes, making use of these photographs I brought. So he put a photograph and like wove 2 sashes. Actually, he didn't have too much time because I was going to leave Mexico City in a week, but he was just weaving 2 sashes. And his intention was that I would take them with me, sell them, or buy them there. And I did. I still have them at home. Using the textiles from the photographs as my guideline, isolated different motifs woven in the sashes based on motifs that I had seen elsewhere in the pottery and drums and staffs. And I spoke more with the people about them. So this is how I began learning their names in Raramuri language, which opened the door for more conversations and to get my first insight regarding the strong connections between these woven designs, the origin stories, and actually the way Raramuri experienced the world. And so it was an extremely rich and inspiring experience for me. And I kept on visiting the Raramuri to try to go now beyond the ethnography and learning how to read. Because it was clear to me that because of the conversations that it was not just a technical act, but actually it was like a way of remembering who one is and what is one's place in life. And these are some examples of the separations or iconographical analysis I did. The next phase of my work took place elsewhere in a very different setting. I moved from the gorgeous to the urban scenario. Here I met a Raramuri woman, with whom I'm still in touch with. Her name is Maria Luisa Chacarito. And among other things, she taught me how to weave. And while we were weaving, well, I was learning the first days, people would also see me and they didn't like the idea. They were worried. They didn't understand why did I want to learn this. And I didn't understand why they were so worried, because I wasn't like going to do any harm. But Maria Luisa later explained to me that for them, weaving is a very sacred thing. So well, later everything was clear and I could continue reading and everything was fine. And I was just left with this situation in my head and like this, okay, it's something very important. So slowly it became clear that of course it was more than this arrangement of figures in the textile, that it was more than using just something in their body. It makes much more sense what she explained to me about the sacredness. She explained that the world at the beginning of all time started from a small fabric that the ancestors stretched out until the surface of the earth was more solid. So in this sense, weaving and the textiles themselves arise from this kind of collaborative relationship with the environment. And they are a manifestation and memory of the origin, the moment in which the world was shaped. Throughout our conversations, she spoke of a world that was connected. And this being connected relates to actually what they call threads, invisible threads that come out of the body and need to be cut in specific moments of life. And throughout the year in specific moments. And if one doesn't do this, they might be dangerous for one can become crazy or just very dangerous in life. And the other threads are those like the dancers, no, the previous one, sorry. The dancers are actually like the threads of the blanket that in the dance, while dancing, they're weaving this blanket that's like the world, or that has an impact on the world. Also, the Raramuri say that they are the columns of the world. They hold the sky, so to say. So they have this responsibility of keeping this order, because this separation is what allows life to continue its course. But this experience of being bonded or connected is very important because it changes completely the relationship with the surrounding world and all the entities. The relationship with plants and animals, and the same word that is used for kin is extended to the animal and plant world. And this relationship with wind, water, places is also bonded. So yeah, so my acts have consequences, and in this sense, I have a deep responsibility, feeling and care also. While reading and conversing with Maria Luisa, she gracefully illustrated this all-encompassing way of being connected by making analogies between the body and the world, saying, for example, the veins carry blood, and the rivers carry water, stones and bones, soil and flesh. And these are the words of the ancestors that is in a way like these reminders of a reciprocal relationship that needs to be taken care of, like a mother-child-like relationship, the mother being the earth. In my previous visit in the gorgeous Valentin Catalina also reveals these complex relationships and relations and connections as well. For instance, when talking about the soul, he made this spiral movement with his hand as to show me graphically what he was talking about, when referring to the soul. But it's also air, or the breath of life, or the spiral woven in the textiles. This figure was also relevant when talking about the path, because it's the path of life that can go up or down. And I mean, what I'm sharing with you is what they explained to me. So, and in this sense, it's like stairs, also woven in the sashes, which at the same time have to do with the mountains that are walked up daily, up and down. Mountains are, like the Raramuri language explains on its own, the world. It's the same word for mountains and world. And they are the triangles with stairs or without them, many times woven in 3 different layers, revealing the way they explain the structure of the world. This is what I showed before in the other one, where you have these 3 structures of the upper, middle, and other worlds that can be accessed by the healers, for example, and not everybody has this access or this way of walking in other paths. And actually for the Raramuri, everything is about walking, not only themselves, but the flowers have their paths, the water has its path, the sun has its path. And they explain regarding the triangles and these movements up and down. We put triangles looking up or downwards because the world looks like this. We need to put everything so that we will not forget what exists. Textiles like the blanket are called kema, which is the same word used for placenta. It's the protecting blanket of the baby, but it's also this double skin that protects from the cold weather. Apart from being worn, the blankets are commonly placed in the ritual patio, as the surface where the crosses, which refer to the moon, the sun, where the offerings are placed. It's like a small mini representation of the world. And by the way, the healer can be wearing these blankets even if it's 40 degrees Celsius. I mean, there's no need for this weather condition protection, but he's wearing it for some reason. And the surface of the earth, the place where we are standing, is called in Raramuri Wichimola. And it's interesting because the same Wichi, Wichimola Wichi, means skin. And according to what Valentin Catalina told me while pointing to the mountains, he said that the earth is also covered with skin. He also says that the sashes resemble the skin of the serpent. And in Raramuri stories and worldview, the serpent has a very strong presence. For example, the serpent that surrounds the world. Living in between the surface and the underworld, guarding the borders or edges of the world, and keeping the water sources. And in one of my first visits in the gorges, I was told by a relative of Valentin that the devil had all this on his skin, all these images on his skin. Everything that was on the world was on his skin. And that's how they took these images and they wove them in the textiles. The idea of the devil was introduced by the missionaries, who in some reports I've read would refer to the Raramuri worship of serpents, plants, storms as diabolic. So with all this in mind, I have tried to share with you how my perception about Raramuri textiles changed after these experiences. And this is, for me, the most important aspect after all these years. And I recall, just to close, Tim Ingles' reflections about art that is anthropological, because they deeply resonate in me. For instance, how these experiences are useful to discuss new paths or different approaches to life. Because if we don't think about what are the connecting points between me and whomever I'm listening to or learning from, then it's just a bunch of information collected to be then put elsewhere, as Ingrid says. For me, this Ramuni way of being in the world can be compared to what Barbara Bender explains about the notion of landscape, being a process rather than a static place that is always being reconfigured within the process. Thus, landscapes are temporary scenarios. Now, to really conclude, I asked myself a question that made a very strong impact in my perception. And after listening to all these stories from Maria Luisa and all the people, I asked, like, can I really accept that these stories, sometimes called myths, and the exegesis that describe the woven patterns and that convey the idea of the origin of life, can be as valid as those that Western world scientists tell us? And can we work in an interdisciplinary fashion that is working in research groups together with indigenous societies? Because in the end, it's just facing different kinds of knowledge. Jeremy Nardi, an anthropologist who worked with the Ashaninka healers from the Peruvian Amazon, and a group of biologists came up with conclusions that were quite inspiring for my work and also to understand further Raramuri worldview, and despite these huge geographical distances. He suggested the possibility of establishing a dialogue between, on the one hand, the healers' narratives and visions that are also woven in the textiles, that talk about two identical entwined serpents, staircases that communicate upper and underworlds, that is, explanations about how they conceive the structure of the world and of life. And on the other hand, the story about DNA, which, when observed under the microscope, is composed of entwined serpent-like structures. You can see them here. I won't explain Jeremy's work here or its impact in my research, but I would just like to say that I find very valuable to consider this approach where indigenous knowledge, in this case, is acknowledged to be as sophisticated as that of Western science and thus can be put into dialogue. Maybe the challenge as an anthropologist is to become less of an academic and more human, allowing oneself to appreciate the value of different ways of thinking and their expressions. And how interesting it is to look for notions that enable creating bridges between these forms and those of the West, for example, or to create common worlds, but not only to describe the difference, analyze them, but allow us to feel that sharing knowledge does not imply becoming the other, but rather valuing the richness of the difference that lies behind the other. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sabina. I'm gonna now pass the voice to Cuauhtémoc Medina, just to sort of close as part of revolving around Mexico and the Mexican scene. I'm sorry I didn't present you properly. Just to tell you, Sabina is probably the person who has studied Raramuri iconography at the deepest level there is. Period. So she holds a postdoc founded by the Herda Henkel Foundation, and right under but I wanted to just okay. And Cuauhtémoc Medina is a Mexico's based art curator, critic, and historian. Having worked extensively in Europe, he currently serves as chief curator at the Museo Universitario de Contemporáneo, MUAC, in Mexico City, an alumnus of the University of Texas, PhD program in history and theory of art, He was the first associate curator of Latin American art collection at the Tate Modern from 2002 to 2008. His appointment coincided with the rise of Tate's interest in the expansion of the collection of Latin American art. Medina also collaborated with Latin American Acquisition Committee of Tate to support the purchasing of works of art in this area. His curatorial approach has an intercultural scope as he changed the orientation of the MOAC from modern art displays to an extensive focus on international contemporary art. In 2019, he was named as curator of the 12th Shanghai Biennale. As the main topic of the Biennale, Medina selected the notion of progress as a word made of the condensation of progress and regress as the reinterpretation of conservatism and transformation in contemporary culture. This topic was uniting an actual for the participating artists, as most of them are based in Latin America and in China. With no further introduction, Cuauhtémoc, thank you so much.
No, on the contrary, thank you, Sofía, Mariscal, for the invitation of this panel, and also to Campo Adentro and Fernando for hosting us. I need to extend the thanks to Giuliana Borea, artist and friend, that actually gave a look to this text and corrected it to a certain extent. So it's a little bit long. I hope I'll be able to cut it through. It happened to be the most interesting thing to reflect on. And the paper is called "We Were Not Born Yesterday: Notes on the Predicament of So-Called Indigenous Contemporary Art in Mexico." Sometimes revolutions are silent, for at least they do not appear to be all that radical until seen in retrospect. On the weekend of April 28 to May 1st, 2022, collectors and art goers visiting the 8th edition of the Material Art Fair in Mexico City were faced with a modest but remarkable change in the logic of market representation. In its project section, the fair included booths of 2 galleries with an indigenous agenda and, in part, an indigenous management. Muy Gallery from San Cristobal Las Casas, established in 2014, offering a wide selection of paintings, textile objects, and photographs from Maya and Zoque artists from the southern state of Chiapas, and Cherpiri, which represents Purépecha artists of the western state of Michoacán, and is an offshoot of the Cherán collective that operates in Cherán, an autonomous town which has achieved an enviable state of peace by effectively expelling government officials, party representatives, and all kinds of armed forces and criminal organizations from its grounds. This time, the First Nation artists present were no strangers to curators and visitors. Several of them were simultaneously being exhibited in museums through Mexico City. Marush Mendes paintings were at the Materna or Modern Show in the University Museum of Contemporary Art. Similarly, a performance of Zoque clay sculpture Saúl Cac, filmed by P.H. Joel, commenting on the lack of government help to this community, was present in the exhibition Art of the Peoples of Mexico that we'll refer later in the Fine Arts Palace. And the Cherani Collective have been commissioned by the University Museum of Contemporary Art to produce a mural which set out to develop modalities of contemporary Purépecha painting as a way to translate the resistance of the community against the nation-state authorities and ideologies. At the same time, one of the members of that collective, Francisco Baruco, had produced a noteworthy installation consisting of 70 carved and painted tree trunks with portraits of members of the Cherán community who were abducted and or assassinated by paramilitary gangsters in the opening show of the Xantoli exhibition space in the Tlatelolco Cultural Center. Anyway, it was kind of a spring of Indian contemporary practices, and this is what I'm trying to discuss. So we need to have a little bit of a look back to explain you what is interesting of that change. I'll start saying that, of course, Mexican modern art is full of indigenous imagery. And however, that doesn't mean that indigenous artists were included in the arts system as such. Certainly, some artists with indigenous ancestry, such as Rufino Tamayo or Francisco Toledo, were brought into the Mexican canon, but always in relation to their exceptional character and their alleged universality, and somehow in terms of they having jumped into producing modernist art and transforming their own roots. The situation with the general concept of where artists of this kind were to be shown has been shaped by a totally different agenda. In reality, the concept of indigenous art is to a great extent foreign, or at least repressed in the Mexican cultural and national discourses. Starting with the foundational exhibition created by painter Dr. Arte in 1922, Las Artes Populares en México, the popular arts in Mexico, which was one of the most transcendental museological projects of the post-revolutionary times, the category Mexican popular art became a customary way to both canonize and subsume the production of so-called Indians as integrated part of the general concept of the Mexican people. Doctoral claims in the catalog of that exhibition, in terms of saying that the term popular arts encompasses all the expressions of ability and ingenuity of the people of Mexico, including both those with artistic and industrial character, carried the argument that all Mexican popular arts have the signature of the vigor of the indigenous races, end of quote. So most of the way in which the Indian presence in contemporary imagery was expressed was in terms of the idea of manual dexterity. The extent to which the concept of Mexican popular arts became a means to absorb the objects and images coming from Aboriginal traditions, while including them with industrial manual products of a culture or mixed-blood peasants and white communities, explains why the exhibition from 1922 was also the model why, for the first time, the ethnological collections of the National Museum were organized and offered to audiences in terms of a certain aesthetic interest. All through the 20th century, in a number of institutions and zoological and commercial venues, the Mexican state and its intellectuals have kept the notion of popular arts as the social and economic divide in relation to the fine arts as part of the reflexive bourgeois culture, but also in relation to the way Indians, conceptualized as living ancestors and roots of the nation, became both an object of a neurotic process of administrative acculturation at the same time as a symbolic object of tutelage and preservation. The infusion of original artifacts and products as handcrafts inserted in the catalog of popular arts has remained in place up to date. It remains the driving concept behind the Museo de Arte Popular, MAP, one of the most visited museums in Mexico City. Occasionally, ethnologists and writers like Miguel Covarrubias tried to differentiate between tribal indigenous art as artifacts that the community only produce for their own usage and consumption, from those that were supposedly made for sale. But in any case, this category, as encompassing the creativity of indigenous handcrafts, explains also why the upper floor of the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City is somehow marginalized in relation to the aestheticization of archaeological graves because of the disenfranchisement of the notion of popular arts from the notion of indigenous representation. I'm going to quickly jump here to just say that, and I'm going to jump up to 31, that the underlying logic of indigenismo and the concept of Mexican popular arts are in great part responsible for the slow incorporation of native practitioners in the programming of arts institutions. Even after the Zapatista uprising of 1994 provoked both a national and international reframing of the potential of the pueblos originarios, originary peoples, by granting indigenous forms of autonomy and association a utopian value in the struggles against global capitalism, those structures were not drastically altered. Indigenous communities and events produced an outpour of visual imagery, including mural works, marking the territories and the spaces of convening of the guerrilla autonomous movement. Yes. But the process in terms of the field of professional art took a very slow turn. In 1993, the year before the Zapatista uprising, a 17-year-old Tzotzil woman from San Juan Chamula, Malush Santis Gomez, took part in a photographic workshop organized by Lot Tamayach, a collective of Maya photographers in Chiapas. In the following years, Santis developed a remarkable Chamula version of phototext works, exploring the concepts, beliefs, and properties of her own cultural milieu, partly based on interviews with elderly women from her family and other communities. Her goal was mainly to rescue and preserve her culture and language, but her images soon started circulating within institutions in Mexico and abroad, showcased at contemporary art galleries, and published in book format, starting with the volume Creencias de nuestros antepasados in 1998. Her artistic career both empowered and ostracized Malush and Cheese, and she soon became a reference for a new contemporary art identity. In parallel, Fernando Palma Rodriguez, an engineer born in the Nahua town of Atocpan in Milpalta, that had moved to Britain to study art and art history in the early 1990s, developed an original practice of creating mechatronic sculptures related to produce narratives based on Nahua myths. Despite being active, yet quite detached from the art scene in Britain, Palma became a significant reference for the contemporary art scene in the following decade. A big survey of his work was displayed in the Museo del Chopo in 2013, and numerous other exhibitions and biennials around the world included his robots. Palma's artistic practice is also articulated through an organization founded by his mother, Carmen Rodriguez, named Calculi del Calco, which is devoted to raising awareness of the destruction of the environment in Milpalta and the loss of linguistic and cultural identity of the Nahua territories that are being brutally absorbed by Mexico City. Interestingly enough, despite the prominence of Malush Cheese and Fernando Palma, Their success and influence is not connected to a notion of pure exceptionality. Other artists like Abraham Cruz Villegas, Noé Martínez, or Lucy Cruz started to operate in the establishment of the artistic circuit, linked in a more or less ambivalent way with a certain notion of ethnic representation. A number of artists started to be shown in relation to challenging the assumptions about Indian artistic practice. For instance, in 2014, the Tlacolulocos, which can be roughly translated as the Tlacolula madmen or crazies, had a solo show in Muac Museum titled The South Never Dies, that presented the murals and screen interventions of a group that, based on Chicano as cultural forms, challenged and breathed out new life into the themes of the imagery of Zapotec ancestry in Oaxaca. That sudden visibility led them to get a mural commission in the Los Angeles Public Library for the Pacific Standard Time program of 2011. However, all those issues, again, were lagging in presenting a certain movement of Indian artists. Even though you need to understand that questions of racism in contemporary art were not actually brought into the discussion locally until 2014 with the theory of color show at Moat. It is only in the last few years that a sudden interest of grouping contemporary indigenous art has emerged among curators and institutions. A major turning point was the exhibition organized by Itzel Vargas Plata in the Chopo Museum in 2019, later presented in the Amparo Museum, that had a pointed poetic title, Los Huecos del Agua, or Shadow Holes in the Water. Strategically circumventing the concept of Indian as a colonial category, Shadow Holes presented foreign art of nearly 30 practitioners belonging to native communities in Mexico. The show criteria was the result of a process of artistic inclusion already underway. Rather than combining artistic manifestations created for and to be experienced by native peoples themselves, Itzel Vargas restricted her selection to work intentionally created to circulate in the art system, while also being permeated by a series of stanza divisions and reformulations related to an ancestral past and a present resulting from 500 years of denial and domination. The exhibition included significant works by senior artists like Palma and Sam Tillis, emerging artists of the contemporary art circuit, Ana Hernández, Noé Martínez, and Medina, Aguilar, Tlacolulocos, etc., along with a collective project, Zapatera Negra, involving the collaboration between Black Panthers and Zapatistas. As anthropologist John Bornstein, the founder of Muy Gallery, writes in his contribution to the exhibition catalog, by documenting, quote, the use of new media by creators of Indian ancestry, end of quote, Shadow Holes in the Water breaks decisively while the ideology that, quote, continues to suppress and erase indigenous artists, perpetuating the idea that native peoples create artisanship and the unfinished effort to solve the problem behind the term popular art, end of quote. So I'm going to quickly jump to say that somehow the argument of Itzel Vargas fed on a notion that Jim Fisher had already somehow outlined, that the idea that a certain indigenous cosmopolitanism could be defined in terms of the work of artists of non-Western belonging that couldn't be defined in terms of notions of hybridity, but somehow suggested a negotiation with both international artistic languages and local symbolic systems. That is, quote, not antagonist to the nation state, but to state repression in its pursuit of destructive modernization, end of quote. In any case, I also want to bring out that Fisher was right in predicting that a perspective like that would offer a possibility out of the, she said, creeping choice between American neoliberal globalization and ethno-nationalism, no quote. Funny enough, those dichotomies can be actually described in terms of what is happening in a place like Mexico, trapped between the aspirational neoliberal utopias of modernizers and the populist return to national myths of sovereignty and essentialist identities that is currently undergoing in several countries in Latin America. After decades of neoliberal disasters, in 2018, a purportedly leftist administration led by Andrés Manuel López Obrador got elected. As in many other aspects of his government, López Obrador has built an enormous popularity with a program that appears entirely foreign to the spirit of the new left-wing social movements around the world, including the hope of building a pluricultural relationship. It's probably unannounced. I need to finish. I survived the microphone. So he is not only attacked feminist, ecological, and human rights movements, and as long as intellectuals, as in reality being representative of certain neoliberal thought, he's also played a very complex game in terms of claiming that he is dealing with the indigenous in terms of giving them the best opportunity they ever had because he's battling poverty. So since the day of his inauguration, López Obrador has been very happy to address indigenous postings offered by allied Indian organizations, while refusing to attend the specific protests from the so-called originary peoples. In the cultural field, his administration, which at the outset proclaimed communitarian culture at the core of its activities, has quickly defunded its own programs in that respect in order to concentrate cultural expenditure into yet another mammoth project located in Mexico City, led by a cosmopolitan male artist, Javier Rivera. So, at the same time, he keeps on claiming that the government's cultural policy could be summed up in the way the administration provides for the poor and therefore for the people, for according to López Obrador, quote, originally peoples are Mexico's deepest truth. And I'm going to jump into the quotation just to get into the matter. So on this argument that even the Constitution claims that the nation is indivisible, and at the same time the mixed blood state insists in describing Indians as the bearing of a national symbolism because they are the carriers of true Mexicanness. We have a number of policies that are extremely contradictory. One of the main, the greatest fiascos, number 65, was the attempt to produce a monument to the indigenous woman, authored by contemporary artist Pedro Reyes, in the former location of the Columbus Monument in Mexico City. By direct designation, we could actually describe that it was even worse, by the Mexico City government in September 2021, Pedro Reyes proposed to erect a 6-meter tall stone sculpture to Tlali, the Nahuatl name for the Mother Earth, which would purportedly stand as, quote, monument to the indigenous woman and years, end of quote, based on the claim that the original peoples can teach us how to take care of the planet. Besides alluding to the ancient Olmec statues that would exemplify the Mexican military tradition of hand stone carving, Reyes claimed that his proposal had been in response to a demand coming from 5,000 indigenous women and the official party female representatives led by the senator and theater artist and activist Jesus Rodriguez. Of course, that's never been documented. The attempt to have a nationalist, artistically retrograde statue representation of an abstract stereotype of gender and race, authored, of course, by a white middle-class male artist, along with the evident conflict of interest of such a commission being granted to an individual known for having campaigned for López Obrador's presidency, it was forced, because of the staggering uproar, to be cancelled. In any event, the episode is symptomatic of the ideological role that some artists from the periphery had in their own localities, while being coached by the global mainstream for their apparent utopian social political practices. That project supposedly was going to be substituted by the idea of erecting in place a copy of a pre-colonial statue representing a woman in order to insist on the pursuit of an imagery of Indian femininity as a sign of national identification. The project was locally cancelled when proper feminist activists took the roundabout in the Reforma Boulevard to erect, without any permit, a counter monument to the struggles of women around the country in a time that the rise of feminism in Mexico is absolutely essential in relation to issues like reproductive rights, but also in relation to the failure of the Mexican government to provide a semblance of justice, particularly in relation to violence against women. Given this reactivation of official indigenism, museum professionals suffer implicit or explicit demands to stage exhibitions based on the concept of staging the greatness of Mexico. And this is the title, La Grandeza de México, of an exhibition that is currently taking place in the Anthropology Museum and the Ministry of Education, with a jumble of materials of different eras, trying to show that we are actually great. But it's a pity that we are a Spanish-speaking country, because the resemblance of the language runs better when you translate it into English. But anyway, so how is it that the creators and officials are trying to respond? Well, they have to respond to the demand who shows thematic, but they also are trying to resist creativity. Just in January 2022, the Palace of Fine Arts, the most visible and canonical venue of Mexican exhibition, presented an exhibition titled Art of Mexico's Originary Peoples, Indigenous Disruptions, with 500 objects from popular arts collections in the country, but including also works from 12 contemporary artists. Despite the indigenous title, the exhibition was an interesting attempt to make the category of Mexican popular arts implode from within, by presenting artifacts old and new, produced by indigenous practitioners, refractory to the categories of local art history. Exhibition curators were basically trying to attack the ideas brought by Dr. Art's book in relation to hoping to celebrate the art of the peoples and nations of Mexico in defiance of the European hegemonic aesthetic views. On the one hand, the curators were trying to convince the audience, and probably the exhibition design helped, that their selection of extraordinary objects from national collections ought to be appreciated as fine art, as masterpieces. and that only the colonial categories have been marginalized. On the other hand, they use the contributions of 9 contemporary artists with native identification and 15 professional arts leading masters as both argumentative counterpoints and as objects of autonomous and pure aesthetic delight. So the one key argument in this project was introducing those objects in terms of individual expressions of the subjectivity of the creators and from the authors, rather than as representative of any collectivity. In a way, the constructive aspects of exhibition try to extend the legitimacy of authorship and recognition of the contemporary native so-called indigenous artists to their predecessors, somehow trying to undo a centenary divide. The outcome of such a claim is hard to assess, both in terms of feasibility and the political relevance of such an intent. But in any case, aside from implications of some of the works of the contemporary native artists themselves, reframing and canonizing previous examples of Aboriginal creativity as proper artworks will require novel structural changes in terms of the behavior of many institutions, markets, and the academia, something an exhibition cannot provoke alone. Nonetheless, the mere projection of the intellectual and institutional disruption such recategorizations would involve appears to suggest the need of a radical change of discourses and practices beyond the presentation of that exhibition. Anyway, I'm going to just quickly say that and this jump to 88, the Mexican pavilion in Venice doesn't really help because the way it was produced was, again, from a bureaucratic demand to have a group show and never a solo show that would have a thematic related to Indian culture. And the result, I'm going to work quickly on that, is to actually make a confused presentation of artists of different lines that reproduces a certain view of exoticization. But I'm going to leave that as a provocation. Undoubtedly, it would be very wrong to claim that the question of developing a plurinational state is clear in the horizon. Neither could be the effective ways cultural institutions could also deconstruct their colonial structures. I'm, however, satisfied that the clumsy attempts to address the ethnic structure of artistic representation in places like Mexico are a necessary starting point of a process that will also involve issues as negotiating with certain native agency in creating the space for exhibition, and also challenging the aesthetic and social structures that Western ideologies are embedded in the local aesthetic customs. Can we, for instance, challenge the texture of scholarship and overturn colonial categories as Mexican popular art? How could we be able to develop a more complex intercultural art worlds with institutions that have barely produced a fragile ecosystem for their own operation? How to negotiate issues of cultural appropriation in contexts like Mexico, where neither mainstream mestizo culture nor the different images and archetypes of original three nations can be understood without attending the long histories of miscegenation, parody, hybridity, and mimicry? How to disenfranchise those issues with the arbitrary boundaries of the modern nation states to take advantages of the inherent cosmopolitanism of many non-Western identities and experience, etc. All those are things that I think we need to discuss in the future.
uses of the archive. Since 2013, she has developed projects related to the history of national museums in Ecuador and the circulation of objects in the cultural field to investigate the tensions between heritage and local appropriations. Welcome, Pamela. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Can you hear me?
We cannot hear. We're having technical issues.
Pamela?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
And can you see the presentation?
No.
Can you see the presentation?
1 second.
Not yet. Hold on. Yes, now we see you in the presentation.
Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to share this conversation with you. In this presentation, I must begin by acknowledging the national strike and the social protests that are currently taking place in my country, Ecuador, led by the indigenous movement that demands social justice in a context of extreme inequality. I want to use this opportunity to make visible the restriction of human rights and the brutal repression we are experiencing and ask for your solidarity. These protests highlight a deeply racist society that sees the indigenous as another, as a servile labor force, like a voiceless subject, as someone that should remain in the past. Since the 19th century, the construction of the national discourse by intellectuals and elites implied the erasure of the indigenous related to the idea of modernity, but also appealed to the pre-Hispanic materiality as the origin of a national vocation. This contradiction, based on denying the indigenous of the present, but valuing the indigenous of the past, is one of the focuses of my research on collecting museums and the exclusions they generate. My practice is located in between art and anthropology. My initial background was in fine arts, and I found in anthropology a possibility to expand my methodologies and questions. There are many connections between the two fields, but I would like to emphasize the importance of the sense of experience, of being there, and of learning through making or participating. In this presentation, I will reflect on how this intersection has taken shape in my artistic and academic work as a way of moving out of the boxes of the disciplines. My research discusses the effects of the formation of national collections since the mid-20th century. I have been interested in understanding how the boom of collecting archaeological objects shaped the national museums of Quito and Guayaquil, but also how it impacted the communities from which these objects were extracted. It was not a violent destruction by the state. They did not confiscate private property or impose archaeological projects in the communities. It was, I think, much more perverse. Through the Central Bank of Ecuador, the institution that issued the currency, astronomical amounts of money were used to buy objects from all over the country. Thus, the state money was distributed by chance as a criterion. To who had inherited a collection from its family, or who was lucky enough to find pots and dolls digging in the ground. Inequity was instituted as a cultural policy to form museums. In the Andes regions, huaquería refers to the illegal extraction of archaeological objects. By pointing at huaqueros, the chain of illicit traffic is reduced to the weakest and most impoverished link. The people who excavate the earth with their hands, entrusting themselves to fortune, do so as a subsistence activity. Since the 1960s, several communities in Ecuador engage in this activity as a product of the desires of the state, private collectors, and the international market. My work in one of these communities began in 2015. I arrived at La Pila following a rumor. The most famous huaqueros, dealers, and forgers of archaeology lived there. Everything that made the patrimonial discourse uncomfortable. La Pila takes its name from a pre-Hispanic water well, which combines water from the river and the sea. It is a conical construction made with stones and inlays of ceramic and gold pieces. In an arid territory, this water is used for medicinal, recreational, and even food purposes. It is a living reminder of the connection with the pre-Hispanic past, but is also a reminder of a functioning ancient technology that is still work in a place with no drinking water or sewage system. The lack of these basic services and other conditions of poverty led us to the question about the gap between the places where the objects came from and the spaces where they end up. The distance between the centers and the peripheries, between what is called things of the ancients in La Pila and what the museums have labeled as heritage. Since the 1960s in La Pila, an artisan craft began to give shape to the authenticity desires of museums and collectors. Clay modeling and stone carving appeared as an economic possibility, restoring pieces to make them attractive to buyers, duplicating pieces upon request, and creating souvenirs. The craft spread to several families that to this day are dedicated to making archaeological replicas. In La Pila, there is an identification with the pre-Hispanic past from a daily coexistence and a permanent resignification, which also dialogue strategically with expert knowledge. In this context, my projects connect archaeological questions about the social life of things and the construction of value in resonance with the intentions of the institutional critique to unveil the networks that sustain the art world and culture. Highlighting the Latin American trajectories of these discussions that does not respond exclusively to Western values and that account for a wide variety of artistic practices in the community. A constant process has been to produce the circulation of images, documents, and objects to recontextualize them and activate new readings by pointing out the importance of the context as a generator of value. In this sense, all my work is based in the notion of site-specific. For example, the acquisition files of the national museums were exhibited in those same spaces in the work Bureau, made of watercolors and collage, that made visible the transactions, the bargains, the names of the people who negotiated what was to be preserved. Information that these institutions have been refusing to disclose or even analyze because it questions the white mestizo discourse of nation, which claims the legitimacy of owning these objects. The same documents in La Pila generated a space of memory and recognition of family members who started the craft and had a role in the collecting network. This local history and the need to promote artisans led to the creation of the Museo Histórico Artesanal La Pila in 2018, a project in collaboration with the community that displays objects that were donated to highlight the names of the makers whose practice circulate mainly anonymously. This museum exhibits archives about the history of the community, and it's a form of return of information that rests in the National Archives. The museum is a project under construction, which certainly depends on the management of local authorities, but it functions as a space for conversation. I am interested in contributing to the reevaluation of artisanal knowledge through its circulation in the same context that generates its exclusion, and that have evidenced the relationships between the scales of the local, the national, and the global as an aspect that constitutes the practice of collecting. At the Museo de América in Madrid in 2018, I exhibited objects from its collection in dialogue with replicas of the artisans and their testimonies, to reflect on the notion of copies as threats and the need to look at the people behind those objects. The stigma surrounding this craft and heritage policies focus on the original objects have had consequences that even involve criminalization artisans, discouraging the continuity of the craft. I recently collaborated with Javier Rivera, an artisan from La Pila, in the creation of a work that reflected on the plundering of Los Gigantes de Bahía, which were found in the beaches of Los Esteros in 1966, and which symbolically returned to the territory from which they were extracted through the knowledge and sensibilities of the replicant artisans. Pieces that are scattered around the world and in Ecuadorian museums were replicated to emphasize the present, the knowledge of the artisans as a way of activating these meanings. First presented in the Cuenca Biennale in 2021, is now exhibited in the Museo of Manta, a place near the beach where they were found. The relationship between art and anthropology in my practice has not been free of tensions and suspicions that paradoxically have come mainly from the art world, where traditional and conservative values over originality and authorship are predominant. However, for me, this relationship implies a constant cycle of activation and construction of knowledge. I understand the exhibition space as an instance of observation, which also allows ambiguity and therefore interpretation, a way to expand the idea of field and how we do field work and reflect on this contingency. From my perspective, it is not an addition of methods based on ethnography, but a way of creating and therefore transforming the reality that challenged me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for sharing with us your practices with us. Last but not least, we have the participation of Giuliana Borea. Sorry. Let me. Giuliana Borea is the director and coordinator for the Amazon Art Project. She's a Marie Curie Research Fellow in the Department of Sociology at the University of Essex and a lecturer in anthropology at the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. I believe this is that's a no one, yeah, sorry. She's now, but she has done all of that too. Sorry, I got mixed up with the bias. Now you teach at the University of Newcastle, but you are a specialist in Latin America with long fieldwork experience in Peru. You were the Peru's Director of Museums and Cultural Heritage and coordinator of the Lima Contemporary Art Museum, and you are Curator of Indigenous Contemporary Art Exhibitions. Much proud of you. With no further interruptions, thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you, Fernando and Sofía, for the invitation to be part of the Finland program at Documenta, and to be part of this amazing panel. And thank you very much to Anna and Indira for the organization of my journey, which has been very complicated, and I'm very happy to be here after several hours of travel, strikes, and etc. It is difficult to be the last, as many great things has been already said, and also for issues of time. So let's see, and if not, I will just cut. Based on my publications, Sofía asked me to discuss 3 topics, which I will try to cover at least briefly. One is the relationship between art and anthropology, and I will focus here on the power of these dialogues and encounters, but also on the importance of reflexivity and ethics. The second point, all of them are going to be kind of 1, 2, 3, but they are related. The second point, I will discuss the use of some categories, which Cuauhtémoc has already explained beautifully. So, yeah, but still I will say some ideas in relation with that. And the issues of representation and the current agendas of self-representation in the arts. Third, I argue that it's important to look at the different genealogies of the relationship between art and anthropology. And I will do this looking at Latin America. I will present some key moments in which art and anthropology have been in dialogue in the region. I see this as a crucial endeavor, as history should not be flattened or only discovered by the European gaze and its conceptual landscape. So what I'm trying to see here in the last point is how the relations between art and anthropology have happened in Latin America, not only from Hall Foster's artist as an ethnographer, but has a longer history. So 1, the relationship between art and anthropology. Anthropology was constantly expelled from exhibitions and platforms with artistic pretensions. Today, anthropology appears mentioned over and over again in the art system. What has happened for this 180-degree turn? Let's just have a map of some of the things, of course incomplete, that we can witness and confirm the relation between art and anthropology. We witness and confirm this encounter of art and anthropology from the individual and collective concrete practices of artists and anthropologists. Anthropologists use more artistic approaches in their research. I will explain this later. Artists use more anthropological tools. Anthropologists and artists and curators and others work together in joint projects, such in the case, for example, of Silvia and Sofía. And there are others that are both artists and anthropologists, as Pamela Cevallos, trained in the 2 disciplines, and this has become more common too. We confirm the relationship between art and anthropology, not only the concrete practices, but also in the studies, such as those of Fred Meyers and George Marcus, with their groundbreaking book, The Trafficking Culture, Prefiguring Art and Anthropology, published in 1995, in which, for instance, the key chapter of Hall Foster, The Artist as Ethnographer, was published there. There are many other subsequent books, as those of Arndt Schneider and Chris Wright, about the interspace that is created in the relationships of art and anthropology. Claire Bishop, Garcia Campion as well, Ertis Andrade, Roger Stanzi, and my book, as many others. We confirm the importance as well of these dialogues between art and anthropology in courses, in art schools, courses of anthropology in the art schools, and also of, for example, contemporary art and anthropology in the departments of anthropology. We confirm the importance of this dialogue from its discussion in events, such as fieldworks in the Tate in 2003, organized by anthropologists Art Schneider and Chris Wright, or Adventures in the Field, the Anthropological Turn, as part of Free Stocks in 2014. Or in Latin America, the International Seminar Studies and Encounters between Art and Anthropology, held in Lima in 2014, which I coordinated. Or the panel, Rethinking Contemporary Art from Anthropology, held in Quito in 2015, coordinated by Ertis Andrade. The panel, Art and Anthropology, held in Mexico in 2015, coordinated by Carla Pinochet and Ertis Andrade. Or the panel, Art and Anthropology, New Approaches, New Relations in Montevideo 2015, coordinated by Alex Lin, Diana de Cordova, and many others. So there is already a long history of debates and discussions of the relations of art and anthropology. It's revealing that this discussion continues, and it's important, and that takes place in this key platform, such as this project in Documenta. It is important because it has kind of passed 20 years of this last, I would say, relationship between art and anthropology, and a lot of studies and discussion have taken place. The forms of these relations have also modified and consolidated, in some cases, such as organizing collectivos of anthropologists and artists and social scientists and other thinkers. The form of doing anthropology and art has also changed in the light of these previous relations of art and anthropology, and that's important. The ways of doing anthropology and the way of doing art has changed at the light of the relationship. And I think that many we can see right now in Documenta is projecting this 20 years of relationship between art and social sciences, I would say. So I want to highlight some few points of these relationships and go deeper into some critique and core potentials as well. Influenced by this closer relation to the arts and also to the importance of the body, anthropologists are more aware now of using a broader repertory of their senses and the materiality to explore and acquire knowledge. This has come from the relation with arts. We are, in anthropology, exploring and acquiring knowledge from different senses, and also with a relation of materiality and importance of processes. For example, Ingol's work on materiality and his highlighting of the knowledge production in the making of thinking while making is crucial. It's not only thinking before making, but it's the thinking through making, and artists know this very well. The closer relation to the arts has allowed as well anthropologists to transmit, to circulate the research in different ways, through the visual, the material, the curatorial, etc. Art has also provided other channels of exploration, such as the possibility to use irony to express, for instance, critique, knowledge, or proposal for different futures. Here, in the Inland project, you can see it in the cheese coin, for example, which I like it a lot, and how the use of this irony allows us to highlight the importance of pastoral economy. And there is another great project, which I'm not gonna explain, but if you have the chance to look, is the full dollar collection of the Ecuadorian anthropologist X. Andrade with local artist Don Pili, who use irony to discuss the structure of power in the art system. On the other hand, some artists, in their decision to approach to the social and the communal, have made use of qualitative research tools from anthropology, such as the interview, but particularly fieldwork. However, perhaps it's better to say the artists take other types of fieldwork, which in their work with communities tend to be a constant intervention, activation, addressing important aspects in the process. But much of the awareness that comes from the long use of this method in anthropology is usually not replicated or not on board by the artist. Anthropologists have constantly reflected in this method as is a foundational method of the discipline, having to deal with ethical issues of representation, respect, and appropriation, among others. Perhaps anthropology's colonial past is what makes the discipline very aware of the power relations that are enacted in the field, even when we try to implement collaboratory processes. However, in many art projects with communities, seems to still permeate perspectives of romanticism of the community, and there is an avoidance to spell out the power of the relations that exist in the narrative, for example, of the project itself. In addition, the artistic / social education, etc. of the project can intend for a better future of the community, but it is also intended to act in the art world and in its forms of validation, which is totally valid. Different agents in a project have different agendas, but transparency and reflexivity is needed. In addition, art with the communities has become a successful format that works today in the art world. Being outside the art world has means that works to be inside it. So being outside to be inside. The results of and processes of these experiences in many cases are shown in museums and platforms of contemporary art. But where are the intellectual voices of the most subaltern actors of the collaboratory relationship? Where are they, their bodies, beyond the exhibition itself? So a few years ago, a European curator contacted me because he wanted to create a joint project in Latin America based on summa causa, the good living. And he was going to relate this with Lowland philosophy. I worked with him for a few months thinking about the explorations of art and anthropology, but the proposal went like this: a job in to work in 3 Andean countries based on the notion of summa causa, where researchers were going to discuss the concepts, article maker and choreography from the local mainstream were going to go to work in and with indigenous communities to review their forms of good living and utopias, and then the artists would propose projects in the same place or in local museums. The curator was going to write a text in the Monde Diplomatique and organize exhibition in Europe. So that were the steps that was the whole project. For me, the formula made me uncomfortable. But by saying this, I don't mean that there are no committed, coherent, powerful works and projects, but I think that it's necessary to show some limitations of these projects and the importance of thinking who I am in the project, who is the artist, who the artist is located in terms of class and race in relation to the collaborators. Who are these positionalities? How do they play out in the scene? Which are my agendas, the artist's agendas, the collective's agendas, the agendas of the project? In addition to reflexivity, time is also one of the ingredients to build a strong relationship of respect and transparency, respect of knowledge, respect of concepts and its mobilizations and uses, of past and project of futurity and aims of the project. The new or not so new value of anthropology and contemporary art circuits and all the possibilities that this has opened and continues opening cannot make anthropology to lose its critical perspective. Therefore, it's not only anthropologists who have to decenter or has decentered, but also the artist needs to be decentered in a self-critique of their practice and of the real possibilities of the social engagement. Okay, beyond the critique from above, the concrete relationships and collaboration between artists and anthropologists and communities and others have become arenas of experimentation and dialogues and connections, of forms of interdisciplinary collectivities, and have created a type of collaboration, of knowledge production, and activism that do not have to start and end in the academic arena. George Marcus defined this as a parasite, something that doesn't start or end in the academic sphere, but that allows these connections, that allows to bring people together and allows to explore and to create all this experimentation. And this is great. And it gives more textures, more alternatives to address our urgent local and global problems and to understand the production of knowledge at different arenas and levels and sites. In the process of collaboration, creative and different answers and strategies to problems, social, ecological, educational problems are explored and proposals are activated. And we can see, for instance, in documenta, art has the potential to mobilize to a wider audience complex and simple, very simple and tiny aspects in powerful ways. In this process, of the relationship between art and anthropology, we have seen different unfoldings of the arts and interrelated unfoldings of the art. Art as research, art as activism, and I would say art as activator. We can use that word in English, I don't know if it exists, activator, but art as an agent of activating. Art and creating as an agent of activating and of creating assemblages. And I think, again, that this is what we are looking. So I will leave it here. The second point that I want to discuss, and it was already discussed, is the issue of categories and representations. Art is today related to anthropology, as we have seen. Anthropology has been related traditionally to arte popular, this problematic concept of folk art. And art has also been related and is related to arte popular in a hierarchical way. So in these relations and the redefinitions of art and anthropology, I don't want to leave aside or avoid a reflection of this category of arte popular. I approached to this topic in my chapter, Arte Popular and the Possibility of Contemporary Subjects for the Structure of Modernity and the Rationalization of Art. And my argument is that arte popular is a catch-all category, un cajón desastre, that operates across Latin America as the art of the others. It is related to practices associated with the traditional, despite there is innovation, and associated to certain bodies, the others, more frequently the case of Peruvian people. Art and arte popular operates together in what I have called a dual hierarchical organization of the art system that was consolidated between 1930 and 1950s in Peru and in similar times in Latin American countries. Arte popular is a parallel category in the hierarchical relation to art, and it is still used, as Cuauhtémoc was explaining. The use of the category of arte popular reflects the continuity of an epistemological order that divides and opposes subjects, productions, and knowledge. And it's a division that crosses issues of class and race, and that despite certain changes, it continues to produce and reproduce. I just want to say that as a folk museum, or the category of arte popular needs to be resolved, the art museum and the category of contemporary art also need this thinking, and this, as these categories stand together, arte popular and arte or contemporary art. It is happening, but still much to do. So the construction of contemporary art, the configuration of contemporary art requires analysis regarding global local processes and political economies in the construction of the so-called contemporary art, which I addressed for the Peruvian case. I just want to finish asking here if we can still talking about giving voice to the indigenous people. Can we talk about us giving voice to them? Is a notion appropriate when indigenous populations have a powerful voice now and have found ways to make themselves heard? Sure that we can collaborate with them and activate platforms to amplify their voices, but we need to remember about today's claim of indigenous people of self-representation. If we want to work together to redefine the limits and the structures of art and the structures of power, it is important to take seriously their agendas. The work and voices of indigenous people and artists are circulated in the world today and have got earlier recognition at national levels. At least in the Peruvian case, Amazonian indigenous artists already were consolidated as part of the contemporary art circuit by 2009-2010. What we can see right now is this global explosion of the interest of indigenous art. And as Naine Terena says, let's hope that it's not just a boom and find the sustainability of the insertion or actually the transformation of the art system through the indigenous art. I just want to mention some things to give an idea of the importance of indigenous art right now. In Ecuador, the indigenous Andean artist, Giuliana Borea, has just received the Premio Mariano Aguilera for research in contemporary art. He's an Andean artist. In Peru, the Chihuahua artist, Sean Bencho, won the Museum National Award in Painting. In Peru, the Andean artist, Benuca Evana, won the IGNA Award of Contemporary Art in 2020. Indigenous Brazilian artist, Denis Paniwa, has won several categories of the People Prize of Contemporary Art in Brazil. In addition, indigenous people are also involved in curatorial activities, as the exhibition are curated with the Utoto Remberriahuatani, or the exhibition created by the Brazilian indigenous curator, namely Terena, Pessoa in the Sao Paulo Museum, or the exhibition created by Denis Paniwa, and so on and so on. These artists are deciding how to present themselves, activate and mobilize their demands, show their urgency, and this power that derives from indigenous artists is a key component in the genealogies of art, and particularly of art in Latin America, of art and anthropology too. So I will just mention very, very briefly these genealogies of art and anthropology in Latin America, starting by an event. There was a vibrant atmosphere. I never thought that art and anthropology concept that I organized in Lima in 2014 was going to receive such a response. We came together, anthropologists, art historians, philosophers, talking about the relations of art and anthropology and artists. There were researchers from different cultural traditions, urban mestizo, Utoto, Kunikwin, Quechua, discussing through panels that had to come together, parallel panels because of the amount of speakers, exhibitions, and videos. This conference took place in a moment, on the one hand, of intense academic and artistic production of the relation between art and anthropology, and on the other hand, of a lack of events in Spanish and in Latin America that fostered this production, if I'm talking about 2014. Many of us were familiar with the work of American and European scholars, such as Jürgen Marcus, Bert Myers, Rivera, and Schneider, and others that I have already mentioned. But we knew little, except from the influential works of Nestor Garcia Camplini, what we were doing in Latin America in the anthropologies of art. The 2014 conference contributed with the creation of networks in the region and to foster this dialogue. People who met there organized other important events. The book Art and Anthropology marks this moment and shows the topics that we discussed. Written in Spanish, the book also seeks to reinforce debates in the region and contribute to broadening the discussion of the field of art and anthropology. In the introduction, I provide a brief review of the dialogues of anthropology and art, and place contributions and discussion from Latin American anthropologists and artistic practices, such as these encounters in indigenismo, social theory of art and non-materialism, urban studies, and in the response to situation of violence. However, as I mentioned, and I quote, it remains open the need to explore more closely the ways in which the relation between art and anthropology have articulated in Latin America, in order to identify the agendas in debate and the forms of relationship has taken place. From then to now, different research have been taking place. And I would like to propose that these relations of art and anthropology take shape in three moments, three very important moments. One is in the indigenismo period that Cuauhtémoc has also mentioned. Another is in the 90s and early 80s with the social theory of art and the emergence of Latin American conceptualism. And a third moment in this recent turn to the arts, to the social, that in Peru happened in the turn to democracy, but also it is important in this last turn to the social that we understand it in relation to the neoliberal agendas. I think I will leave it there because I have this published. But what I want to say is that it is important for us to see this, that the relation between art and anthropology first is not new. It comes from different times. In Latin America, it comes from indigenismo, and we need to understand the political economy that happened in that time. But in that time, anthropologists, artists, and politicians were discussing about these topics. They were referring to the indigenous. The indigenous was not part of this discussion, but these disciplines were talking together. So there was this moment of encounter. In the 60s, 80s, is this theory of social theory of art, which is key and it's important to keep exploring. Mikhail Mitrovic is an anthropologist. He's doing up the PhD about this work, and there's other work I know in Germany about trying to explore more this area. And then there is this last term of art and anthropology that is the one that we are reading, and is the one that I approached at the very beginning of my talk. But it is important to understand the genealogy, as I mentioned in the introduction, not the pattern, the history.
Thank you so much for those who resisted to the end. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We wanted to leave spaces for questions and participation, but I don't think we have time. But I do invite you to check Giuliana's book, which is very interesting, the topic, and also a myriad of publications by Cuauhtémoc, Sabina, and everyone who was present. So thank you so very much, and good afternoon.
We can also continue outside in the Mariscal, have some drinks.